unlike Hakeem Jeffries, unlike all of these fucking elitist, centrist, fucking party-ite Democrats, Republicans understand power. They will reinterpret it a million times as long as they get their way. Let's go dark mode. Cool. Supreme Court has rejected the independent state legislator theory. All right. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled in a 6-3 decision that state constitutions can protect voting rights in federal elections, and state courts can enforce those provisions in a key opinion that should safeguard the integrity of the 2024 election. Now, 6-3, I'm not going to say that that's, that's quite enough, because keep in mind, this was only saved by what? One vote? If not, oh no, 2 votes, right? Because it would have been 5-4. Yeah, 2 votes and, 2 flipped votes, and that's it. So, I mean, keep in mind, or no, is that 2 votes? Am I crazy? Half of, yeah. 2 nays flip this. We only edge this out by 2 humans, 2 individuals' votes. In a practical sense, Tuesday's U.S. Supreme Court decision will not make a difference in North Carolina, where Republicans retook control of the state Supreme Court after the 2022 election, and the new GOP majority has since reversed a prior court's ruling that redrawn congressional maps violated the state constitution with an extreme partisan gerrymander. That means that the legislature's politically lopsided map will likely return in some form for the 2024 election, with little likelihood that it'll change for the rest of the decade. Great. Isn't that wonderful? If you're ever wondering if Republicans are in favor of democracy, just look at the way they gerrymander. But at the same time, the court did not set a clear standard articulating a test for when a state court has exceeded its powers, and that may well present issues for the next election. Quote, although the elections clause does not exempt state legislators from the ordinary constraints imposed by state law, federal courts must not abandon their duty to exercise judicial review. John Roberts wrote in the majority opinion, this court has an obligation to ensure that state court interpretations of state laws do not evade federal law. For example, states, quote, may not sidestep the takings clause by disavowing traditional property interests, unquote. While the court does not adopt a test by which state court interpretations of state laws can be measured in the cases implicating the elections clause, state courts may not transgress the ordinary bounds of judicial review, such that they arrogate to themselves the power vested in the state legislators to regulate federal elections. Conservatives, say it with us now, Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, and Neil Gorsuch dissented. Roberts noted, so yeah, only 2 of the most openly corrupt justices on the court. That's nice. Roberts noted that the court last discussed a version of the ISL during Bush v. Gore, the case after the 2000 presidential election that handed the election to President George W. Bush. Last discussed a version of the ISL, independent state legislature. Oh yeah. When Bush would have lost had they kept counting, but the Supreme Court stepped in and just picked a winner. We do not adopt these or any other test by which we can measure state court interpretations of state laws in cases implicating the elections clause. He wrote the opinion, quote, of the court. This area are complex and context specific. We hold only that the state courts may not transgress the ordinary bounds of judicial review such that they arrogate to themselves the power vested in the state legislatures to regulate federal elections. But in his dissent, Thomas predicted that the court's opinion would lead to chaos. The majority opens a new field for Bush-style controversies over state election law, and a far more uncertain one. At issue in the case was Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution, which says that the, quote, times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. The North Carolina legislature, backed by the Republican National Committee, read that clause as meaning that only the state legislator may make election result rules, unless the Congress of the United States passed contrary legislation in its most extreme form that would have left both state courts and governors out of their traditional roles, with courts unable to rule on the state constitutional provisions or other laws involving elections and governors suddenly deprived of their veto powers. Okay, so let's like really put this in perspective for a minute. Have any of you ever played Yu-Gi-Oh? Maybe if you play Magic the Gathering, how often are there like debates, but when you're playing on card rulings, right? Like how often do and you flip a card, the effect takes place, it says something specific, and your friend has to raise their hand, or your opponent raises their hand, and they go, does that mean only? Or does that mean this other thing? Is there a way I can wiggle out of this? Is there a way that that's not a move that you're allowed to make? Is there a way that I can get out of this card taking this effect, right? All the fucking time. We've all been there with the guy who wants to pull up the guidebook and the official the official like league rules book to say like, oh no, well, the interpretation of the card by the what is it, TCG, I think, yeah, that by the TCG board is that it means this specific thing. It can't mean that. It would have to say, it's like, oh, well, does it say only I can do this? Well, no, it says you must do it. It's like, oh, so I have to do it, but it's not the only thing I have to do. It like, this is where we're at with the Supreme Court. And and keep in mind, the Supreme Court, unlike, like, this is how we're making decisions on laws. And the Supreme Court's not any more qualified, I think, to just decide the interpretation of this or that law. They're priests. That's what they are. They interpret, but their interpretations are, as always, left up to their own personal politics. Not to say that Supreme Court isn't like useful or even a tool that we can use that can be helpful when it comes to like law, but at the same time, the way laws are written, the way that people make it onto the court, it's become rather obvious that this is less about finding the truth of what our Constitution lays out for us, less about the truth about what rights we do have, and more about who's coming up with those interpretations. At the end of the day, there is no version of the Supreme Court that's ever, and I mean this, ever been apolitical. The joke that the Supreme Court is this apolitical, this neutral arbiter just calling balls and strikes, bullshit. Utter fucking bullshit. Absolute utter bullshit. It's plain reading when they need it to be, and it's interpretable when they need it to be. There's hardly any consistency with a lot of these guys. And when there is consistency, you find a disturbing amount of corruption. That is the one thing you do find when you get consistency. The North Carolina legislature I read that right. Opposing the independent state legislative theory in the Supreme Court were not only Democratic partisans, but a vast array of election law experts, important scholars on the left and right, judges appointed by both Republicans and Democrats, and the Conference of State Chief Justices represented the chiefs in all 50 states. It was widely expected that the court would moot the case because the newly constituted North Carolina Supreme Court, for all practical purposes, is now in sync with the state legislature. But Roberts wrote in his majority opinion, quote, the elections clause does not vest exclusive and independent authority in state legislators to set the rules regarding federal elections. North Carolina has been in the eye of election storms before. In 2019, the U.S. Supreme Court, by a 5-4 vote, even closer, ruled that while partisan gerrymandering may be, quote, incompatible with democratic principles, the federal courts are powerless to rule on such, quote, political questions. But Roberts, writing for the majority, pointed to other remedies, specifically state legislators or state constitutional provisions, to, quote, limit partisan considerations in redistricting. Unlike the federal constitution, state constitutions often have provisions that limit state legislators' ability to engage in partisan gerrymandering. Lovely. Let's watch a video and then actually there's a video I want to see if Democracy Now got somebody on, because I feel like that is something that they would have done. Well, my headphones aren't connected. Oh, this is also still muted. Cool.
Outside the Supreme Court. Julia, what do we know about this ruling? This is the biggest ruling today. Of course, there's some bigger ones we're expecting later this week, but the Supreme Court has said that the North Carolina state legislature has to let its courts review changes to voting there. This all came up in 2021 when the Republican-controlled legislature said that their court did not have the authority to review the way they drew congressional maps. They pointed to something called the independent state legislature theory. Now the court is saying that that was too broad of an interpretation and that they should allow the courts to intervene. This has widespread meaning because it could be that if they had gone the other way, then each Republican or Democrat controlled state legislature would have control not just over drawing voting boundaries, but over a number of ways that you could register to vote, really anything having to do with state controls in the voting process. This is also the second decision that this court has made this term on voting rights. Remember, they said that Alabama violated Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. So they are upholding voting rights in both of these cases, telling these states that no, they do not have this authority when it comes to redrawing congressional maps. And we're now waiting for bigger decisions to come later this week on things like LGBT rights, student loans, and affirmative action. They're running out of time. We expect those decisions to come probably Thursday or Friday of this week. Those will be big days, and we'll keep watching it. All right, Julie Ainsley outside the Supreme Court for us. Thank you. Want to bring in Laura Jarrett now, who has been following this very closely as well. Laura, if you will, walk us through, as we just heard from Julia, the decision there, the significance of all of this and what it means going forward.
Well, it had the potential to be quite sweeping if the court had actually adopted what the Republican lawmakers had wanted, which was that state courts would have zero role to play when it comes to evaluating how states go about running federal elections. That would have been a bold and aggressive move, but the Chief Justice and Justice Kavanaugh not going along with the rest of their conservative colleagues here, deciding that, in fact, state courts do still have a role to play. Now, of course, this was all about a map dating back to 2021, but it's really about what's going to happen in 2024, Yasmin. Yeah. And that's why it's so important that they actually decided to knock down this theory now before we were reaching some sort of emergency situation where it's on the eve of, having to decide a major dispute. Remember all of the cases that former President Trump filed back in 2020, and all of those cases where state courts had a major role to play in saying that the president was not right, or at least not adopting his theory. If they had bought into the Republican theory there, state courts would have had no role to play in all 60-some of those cases that he lost. So it is a major victory for voting.
And keep in mind, every time that they say, so the biggest issue here is like the overall biggest issue would be that, because I find that there's always a lot of the state court's this and they have the power to do this. The overall takeaway from this is the Supreme Court could have ruled in a way that state courts and governors would have no ability to rule or influence on elections run federally in their state. So if you're in North Carolina and you pass some absurd election map, some kind of just crazy racist map, or in the case where in a scenario that Donald Trump wanted to see in North Carolina, we'll use as the example, if you don't want your state to send its electors for Joe Biden, you can just say, nope, we've decided that we will send whoever we want, or we will move, do whatever it is we want to do with this kind of election. We'll strike people off the voter rolls. We'll, it just completely disenfranchise people. There wouldn't be a mechanism for really legally for anybody to do anything, because if the Supreme Court had ruled in favor of North Carolina at this time, it would have been a situation where the federal government can't get involved because states run their own elections, even for federal elections, and states' Supreme Courts and their governors also have no ability to rule or influence any of this. It's strictly up to the legislature. So as long as Republicans in North Carolina could hold the legislature, they can do whatever the fuck they want in their elections, whatever it is that they want. They have carte blanche to essentially pick winners and losers. Now, would they do that so openly and brazenly? Probably not. But you don't need to just declare the election for a Republican candidate. You just need to find enough reasons to kick people off of the ballot. That's all you have to do, or kick people off of the voter rolls, I should say. That's all you have to do. Pass a gerrymandered map that makes it virtually impossible for Democrats to win. That is the way you would do this. And without a court's ability to rule on this in the state, and without even without anybody being able to rule on any of this stuff, and it only being left up to the legislature, it would leave our democracy up to the most partisan of partisan, which is going to be the state Senate. So keep that in mind.
Rights advocates who had been very concerned about what the court would do because they took the case in the first place, right? So people were saying, well, why did the court take it? Why didn't they just affirm in the first place? The fact that they took it at all is what had so many wondering, what would they do? And Mimney had thought, you know what, they'll just dismiss the whole thing as moot. They'll just decide we don't need to reach this right now, especially because the lower court decision, which is the one that they were actually reviewing, they had reversed themselves because the court had changed hands, had changed political parties. So they could have just said, we're not going to do this. We're going to wait for another day, but they didn't. And they decided to take it now and make sure that, at least for right now, people are aware going into 2024 what the rules of the road are.
Yeah, and keep in mind, and the reason why they said that it's not nearly as up in the air for North Carolina is mainly because North Carolina now has parity in terms of which party is running the state legislature and the state Supreme Court there. So in a way they already have a lot of control over this stuff, which means that they're going to pass gerrymandered maps. They're going to disenfranchise as many people as they can. And the Supreme Court is just going to give them a rubber stamp on that. But again, this is still working within the framework that we have. So, if there is a change on the state Supreme Court, if there is a change in the legislature, there are legal avenues to challenge some of the overreach that might take place, and almost certainly will. But I want to see.
Bring in now Neil Katyal, who argued this case in front of the Supreme Court.
Okay,
Neil,
I've seen this guy.
Great to talk to you. Your reaction?
Well, I could not be more pleased. The decision's just come down a few minutes ago, and so we're all still studying it, but it looks like a clean win and a vindication for my client Common Cause's position, which was that, over 200 plus years, no one has read the Constitution the way that the Republican National Committee wanted to read it here.
And keep in mind, as with a lot of stuff when it comes to the courts and when it comes to seeking the Supreme Court of the United States as opinion on things, it's not about this historical understood reading of our laws, of our Constitution. What it comes down to is if you want the rules written in your favor, you're going to need judges who are already siding with you. You need the refs to already be in your back pocket. And that's what the Federalist Society is here for. They shepherd a lot of these right-wing judges through the system, connect them to all sorts of people, so that when the time comes for Mitch McConnell or a Republican-led Senate to to nominate judges, they have an ability to do that at record paces. And this is something that the Democrats are not doing. It's not something that liberals are doing. It's not something that Democrats are doing. Right now, there's an entire argument about Dianne Feinstein's place in the Senate because she's unable to vote on some of these judicial nominees that Biden's nominating. And that's going to stifle the ability for liberal justices to make it, or liberal judges, I should say, to make it onto those federal benches and to move up into the upper echelons, maybe even to the Supreme Court at some point. It's just, this is a place where Democrats and the establishment wing has just not taken it seriously. And it's where Republicans have worked incredibly hard, have fundraised millions of dollars, and their investment is paying off at the end of the day. And this is another example of Democratic Party negligence. You know, the Democratic Party broadly, the party of negligence, the party of somehow an inability to do the most basic functions of politicking. It's disgraceful.
And what they wanted to do was gut our system of checks and balances and empower state legislatures to do whatever they wanted in federal elections. And, you know, as I suggested at the oral argument to the court, I can't think of something more un-American than that. And so we're really pleased to see 6 justices agree with our position. And the decision was written by the Chief Justice.
But,
I think it's,
you know, because what is it? It was Thomas Alito Gorsuch. All you needed was Kavanaugh and Coney Barrett. That's all you really need.
a reflection of, him looking at the issues and saying, yeah, it can't possibly be what the challengers are saying it is here.
Neil, I know you have confidence in the arguments that you presented in front of the court, but with that in mind, are you at all surprised by this decision, considering the conservative-leaning court and the precedent they have set?
Well, there was certainly a lot of commentary all through the 18 months or so of this case that this court is too biased, that they interpret things a certain way, and that there's no way we could win, and that this was a way to give the Republicans major control over federal elections. And I just didn't buy that. Maybe because I'm a Supreme Court lawyer and my job is to argue there. But in the end, I do think that history can provide clear answers to questions, and the structure of our Constitution can. And, my job and my team's job was to really make that clear. I was really pleased to be joined on my team as my co-counsel, Judge Michael Ludig, one of the most respected conservative jurists before he left the bench. And I think what that underscored was just the Constitution is truly above politics, and there's a way to do constitutional law that reflects, our history and traditions and our structure and our values.
And let's be clear about this. And this is coming from a lawyer. This is talk that I would expect from a lawyer. But this is the kind of language that we hear frequently, constantly, from Joe Biden, from the Hillary Clinton ilk, from that wing of the party. We constantly hear this, the soul of the nation, of the birth of the sunrise, of the smile on the babies' faces, and the all this shit, right? We always hear this kind of these kind of platitudes, and I'm all for them when it comes to lawyers going in there and making arguments and everything. But the party does this. And what they don't understand is that Republicans, the RNC, does not give a fuck about any of that, any of it. They don't care about traditions. They don't care about our values. They don't care about our norms. They don't care about our freedoms. None of it. The RNC is a corpo-funded organization the same way the Democratic Party is. The only difference is the Republican Party delivers a lot more money. And at the end of the day, you have ideologues in that party as well who understand politics. Unlike Joe Biden, unlike Nancy Pelosi, unlike Hakeem Jeffries, unlike all of these fucking elitist, centrist, fucking party-ite Democrats, Republicans understand power. And they will do whatever it is they need to do. They will bend the word of our Constitution. They will break it if they have to. They will reinterpret it 1,000,000 times as long as they get their way. We are in a time, we are in a moment in this country where we cannot sit idly by while every couple of months the Republican Party, some red state is trying to peel back gay marriage, peel back democracies, the possibility for a thriving democracy in this country. Every single time they make effort after effort after effort after effort after effort after effort after effort to take away the voting power of people who oppose them. And every single time they step up, Democrats don't move a muscle. They don't offer any defense. They figure, let the courts figure it out. They figure, let the lawyers argue it. Let's gamble on a few lawyers arguing for this democracy to, quite frankly, keep the last of its breath. We frequently say we don't have fighters on the Democratic side, and that's incredibly true. But what we have worse than anything are people whose values are not in the proliferation of democracy, who aren't in the enfranchisement of everybody in our nation. It's just to keep things exactly where they are at any moment. And it's never going to be enough. It's never going to be enough for Republicans. They're never going to stop trying. They're like, at the end of the day, they've got people getting groomed by TPUSA. You don't think we're going to be dealing with this in 10, 15, maybe 20 years? People my age stepping up who grew up, who were watching TPUSA in their early 20s, early to mid 20s. You don't think we're going to see that? We're not going to see eventually those dividends pay off? And what is our alternative? We have Democrats who stifled Bernie every single time he made the party popular. So this article caught my eye. It's the same topic, but I'm interested what the leaving the door ajar is. Repudiated the most extreme form by a 6-3 vote. At the same time, however, Roberts said that in overseeing election provisions, state courts, quote, do not have free reign to exceed, quote, the ordinary bounds of judicial review. How to know when courts do exceed that power? The court majority didn't say, leaving for another day the task of articulating a standard for determining when federal courts may tell a state court that it has gone too far in interpreting state law. Joining Roberts in the majority were conservative justices Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett, and the court's 3 liberals, Sotomayor, Keegan, and Ketanji Brown Jackson. Justice Clarence Thomas wrote in the dissent, saying first that the case presented no live controversy anymore since a subsequent state Supreme Court decision had thrown out the original ruling. Justice Samuel Alito joined that part of the dissent only, but Justice Neil Gorsuch joined the second part of Thomas's dissent, which disputed the majority's conclusion on the merits of the case. And this is also what the conservatives will do. They will rule in a favorable manner, but tell them you need to bring me this. Like narrow it and bring it to me, and I can give you a vote. Election experts disagreed on the effect of the ruling. NYU law professor, no, I'm just kind of curious. Legacy of Bush v. Gore. Okay. So that was their whole thing. Okay, cool. That we don't have any kind of measuring, because that's also like when we're discussing law and when we're like litigating law, I suppose, Like the boundaries of any of this stuff can't be vague, because any vagary immediately leads to exploitation. So it's telling that they would leave that sort of stuff still available to them. We'll see. Do I think this is the end of the independent state legislature theory? Not at all. Not at all. This is only one version of this kind of the ruling they are looking for. So keep that in mind. The thing that they tell, like at the end of all YouTube videos where they tell you to like click on one of these like things to watch more videos. Yeah, I've been meaning to film one of those. So that's what I was doing. I was just setting it up to